clarity and charity.
Heard around the world on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
The Simple Truth, rising up to explore the difficult topics of real life. Join us as we proclaim the good, the true, and the beautiful with the simple truth of Jesus Christ and His Holy Catholic Church through Scripture, tradition, and the Catechism. And now, your host, Jim Higgins.
It is great to be back with you on The Simple Truth. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of Saint Joseph. Today is Testimony Tuesday, where we bring you real, live, first-hand testimonial accounts of the life-giving reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church. Our guest today is Joseph Pearce. He is Director of Book Publishing at the Augustine Institute, editor of the St. Austin Review, series editor of the Ignatius Critical Editions, senior instructor with Homeschool Connections, and senior contributor at the Imaginative Conservative. He is an internationally acclaimed author of many books, including his newest title, Faith of Our Fathers, A History of True England. Joseph Pearce is the world's foremost Catholic biographer, and today he's with us to share some of his personal story. You can also learn more about his incredible journey to Jesus and His Catholic Church by reading his book, Race with the Devil, My Journey from Racial Hatred to Rational Love. Joseph is also a terrific public speaker. If you're interested in booking Joseph Pearce for a talk, you can contact him via the Catholic Speakers Organization, CatholicSpeakers.com. Joseph Pearce, thank you so much for being with us today. How are you?
It's my pleasure. I'm well, thank you.
Excellent. Well, we always begin at the beginning. Childhood, what was your early life like, your family, the culture that you grew up in?
Well, as you would probably gather from my accent, I'm not American. I say to my neighbours here in South Carolina that I'm as southern as they are. It's just that I'm from southern England. So I was born in London, but was raised. So when I was about a year old, my family moved out to the countryside, to Suffolk in England, in East Anglia, to the east of the country. I spent my childhood there, somewhat idyllically, a very happy childhood. But as regards to faith, my parents were typical Anglicans in the sense that they were theoretically Christian, but de facto agnostic. They would have said that they believed in Jesus, but we never went to church. We never prayed ever at any time. The only time we went to church if someone was getting married or a funeral. We like to watch a carol service on Christmas morning, but that was about the limit of our religious engagement. So I was raised in effectively, at best a subliminal sort of vaguely Christian culture, but to all intents and purposes, I was raised as an agnostic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fairly relatable to a lot of folks who grew up in the United States as well, that sort of a background, and even just growing up in the Catholic faith with similar going through the motions, but not really the real belief, the real faith in what it is that the Catholic Church truly holds and who it is Jesus actually is. And so, Joseph, when did that begin to come alive for you? Or at least let me put it this way, in your early years, let's stick with the early years for a moment, were there any seeds planted during that time where you thought, well, maybe there is something more to this Jesus or to faith in Christ, anything along those lines?
Well, not too much. I mean, insofar as I had any engagement with Catholicism was negatively. My father was very anti-Catholic. He referred to Catholics as bead rattlers. So I sort of grew up with this antagonism towards Catholicism, but based on ignorance, I knew nothing about it. But there was one episode when I was a child that I remember. I was probably about 8 or 9, I'm guessing. A friend of mine, I say girlfriend, but I was 8 or 9. She was a friend that happened to be a girl. She was going through a phase where she was interested in Catholicism for some reason I have no idea about. I've lost touch with her many, many years ago. But she took me into the local Catholic church, the only Catholic church in the small town in which we're living. And I had a real sense of a real presence. Now, I couldn't have explained to you what that was, but there was something in that Catholic Church that I did not find in any Anglican church I'd been in. Even though the Anglican churches, of course, superficially at least, were more beautiful. I mean, they were, of course, Catholic churches, 1,000 years old, 8 or 900 years old, 12th century, for instance, very beautiful architecturally. But of course, the Blessed Sacrament had been removed, the statues had been removed, the sacred art had been removed, so you have an empty shell. And I think that even as an 8 or 9-year-old, knowing nothing about religion, I could tell the difference between an empty shell and something that had the real presence of Jesus Christ, even though I couldn't articulate it. So that stayed with me. So when many years later I started approaching the Catholic faith, that memory came back to haunt me, so to speak.
Wow. And we're talking with Joseph Pearce today and sharing some of his personal story here, Testimony Tuesday on The Simple Truth. Joseph, then, how was it in terms of the education that you were experiencing? Were you going to, I'm not really sure what the education system is like over there. Is it similar to the States where you have public and private schools? Did you go to a public government type school or more of a private school? What was your experience like?
Well, my wife, who's from Southern California, who's been married to me for 21 years, said she's been spending the last 21 years learning English as a second language. So we have to be careful here, because actually in England, a public school is a private school. In other words, the public schools are the posh schools that the wealthy go to. Everyone else goes to state schools. So I went to the latter. So what in America would be called a public school. And I had a very poor education, a very secularist education. I learned most of the valuable things as a child, actually, as regards education, from my father. Now, I just said that he was anti-Catholic, so I learned that from him, but he also loved Shakespeare, he loved history, he loved geography, he taught himself several languages and was fairly conversant in German. Who left school at 14 because of World War II, but that was that inheritance, because I realized but I love.
All right, we're having a bit of audio trouble. We're going to try to see if we can get a better connection there. We'll try to reconnect with Joseph here in just a moment, but very, very important testimony to hear today with Joseph Pearce. He is prolific in so much of his good work as a Catholic man, and certainly with regard to education. Ignatius Critical Editions is one way that he engages in that way, putting together some great classic works with great Catholic commentary as part of it, in terms of essays that you can read ahead of the classic works, like St. Augustine's Confessions, for example, but many fictional works as well. I think of one that we recently were looking at, Jane Austen's book Pride and Prejudice. There's an Ignatius Critical Editions of that as well, kind of a great way to introduce some interesting storytelling to your young people as they are growing up, and to talk about these things, teach them great lessons with regard to that. As parents, we are the primary educators of our children in every way, most importantly in the way of the faith, in the way of reality, helping them to understand that Jesus is real, the Catholic Church is the real deal. We want to hand this on and hand it on well. And so as we're educating in other subjects, certainly the classics is an important aspect of that. To do it within a Catholic framework, very, very important. And so I very much appreciate Joseph Pearce's work, especially with regard to the Ignatius Critical Editions that you can find wherever you find books. Certainly Ignatius.com, I think, would probably be the website for Ignatius Press, or if that's not, just search Ignatius Press and you can find them that way. But any place where you're searching books, you can find those Ignatius Critical Editions. But so vital to hear about the importance of education and how to put that into a framework of a true Catholic formation. So when we get Joseph Pearce back, we'll dive back into his formation, his education, some of the positives he's sharing with us, as well as some of the negatives, which is important to take a good, honest account of our background. That's something we all ought to do. You can tell when Joseph's sharing his story, he's able to do it freely, right? He's able to share the good and the bad in his background. You can tell he's a man that's truly looked at it and assessed it, and been able to do that with an objective eye so that he can talk about it and share it without having to kind of protect against some of the things maybe he wouldn't want to look at or anything like that, but just facing it truly as it is, and then being able to speak to it and how it's affected him for good, for bad, and how he's been able to take those good lessons and move forward, how he's been able to learn from those bad lessons and be able to make sense of those things as well. So that's good for all of us, right? And so I guess as we head into the break in just a moment here, something to reflect on. These Testimony Tuesdays are always helpful, not just to hear a great story of somebody else and how Jesus and his Catholic Church has come alive in their life, but also to reflect upon our own stories, upon our own lives. And here maybe we can take a moment to reflect on just the good and the bad in our background, especially in those early years. And to say, you know, there were some bad things, there were some good things. Can I truly make sense of both of those things, assess them as they really are, and try to understand how these things have affected me? So for those things that have been negative in our backgrounds, in our early years, God, help us to see what you want us to see in that. Help us then to be free to be able to look at those things, not run away from them, not be unable to look at those things, but to look at them squarely and to be able to make sense of them and to invite you into them wherever you have not been part of them before. We invite you into those places that might need healing, into those places that might need purification and strengthening. And then those good things, help us to see those good things in those early years as well, and to see how they affected us in positive ways with thanksgiving and with praise of you, God, in these ways that you have provided for us, in these ways through others. So thanks be to God, and also, Lord, have mercy in those ways that we need your mercy and your grace, even in the brokenness. We love you and we praise you. We're going to be right back on The Simple Truth. Stay tuned.
Hi, this is Jim Wright, president of the Station of the Cross. Did you know that iCatholic Radio has listeners from more than 122 countries? This means that as an iCatholic Radio listener, you are part of our global Station of the Cross family. If you enjoy listening to our programs on your iCatholic Radio app, please support our fall appeal. Donate directly to our app or call us at 1-877-711-8500 or visit thestationofthecross.com or return an envelope from one of our mailings. Thank you for supporting iCatholic Radio.
Have you ever dialogued with someone who espouses relativism, which says there is no truth, or it might be true for you, but not for me? It's pretty frustrating. Deep down, we know these claims are false, but we often don't know why. Here's the reason. To say there is no truth is a contradiction. The assertion is tantamount to saying it's true that there is no truth. Plain absurdity. Now, the other position, there is no absolute truth, just truth relative to the individual set of beliefs, is problematic as well. The usage of the verb is implies an assertion about the objective order of things. It's the same thing as saying it's absolutely true that there is no absolute truth, which of course is a contradiction. No matter how the relativist slices the pie, he ends up with a contradiction, making relativism an unreasonable worldview. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
About 1/3 of all internet traffic is directed to what? To filth. And in the course of 1 year, one single filthy website can get up to 36 billion hits, which is about 5 times the population of the whole world. What happens to these souls that visit these websites? Truly risk leading us to hell.
That's Sermons for Everyday Living, weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. It is a Testimony Tuesday here on The Simple Truth. Our guest is Joseph Pearce. We're trying to reconnect with Joseph. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to reconnect with him, had some technical issues in that first segment. So in the meantime, let's open up the phone lines. Can somebody out there help me out? Give a call in. We're talking about our personal testimonies, our personal stories of Jesus and his Catholic Church coming alive for us making that act of faith and participating in his grace more and more in the sacramental life of his Catholic Church. Thanks be to God. Is there something you'd like to share, particularly, I would say, about your early life? Seeds that were planted, things that were very, very good that you received that helped you along the way, or also some things that maybe were difficult, that you can look back on and that were very hard things in your early life that maybe led you even away from God, away from Jesus, away from the truth of the Catholic faith. But now later you've been able to look back on, make sense of, and receive great healing and great light, and actually have experienced great growth in being able to look back upon those things and understand it. Is there anything that you want to share with us about your personal story? We can bring it right to the show today for the good of all, specifically in your early life, but anything at all. Again, Testimony Tuesday. Who out there in the audience wants to share some personal testimony on this fine Tuesday? Give us a call now, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. Again, Joseph Pearce is our guest today. We're trying to reconnect with him. And you know, that book that he has written on his own personal story, some of his own personal story, it's entitled Race with the Devil, My Journey from Racial Hatred to Rational Love. And a very powerful book, a very powerful story to delve into. And I think maybe we've got Joseph back with us. Joseph, are you there?
I am. I have no idea what happened there. Thanks be to God for technology, right?
Yes. Well, wonderful to have you back. And I guess if you want to just pick up where you left off, I guess in the early life, in the schooling, and maybe bring us up even through your high school years, anything you want to share about the high school years heading into kind of discernment towards college years.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure exactly where we lost connection, so I'm going to skip the rest of my childhood. Basically, when I was 12 years old, my family moved back to London, so I had this sort of very idyllic, peaceful countryside life, and moved back to London, and I went off the rails very quickly. And at the age of 15, while I was obviously at high school still, I joined a radical supremacist organization called the National Front, and rose through the ranks of that to become the youngest ever member of its governing body, and edited a journal called Bulldog. And for editing that magazine, I was sentenced to prison when I was 20 years old for publishing material likely to incite racial hatred, so a hate crime. And I spent my 21st birthday in prison, and I came out and carried on as I had before as a radical, and went to prison again when I was 24 years old. I spent my 25th birthday in prison. But between those two prison sentences, I was reading people such as G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc and C.S. Lewis. So I at the beginning of the second prison sentence, I thought, this is crazy. I don't even believe this stuff anymore. I'm now serving a prison sentence for things I don't even believe in. I've been living a lie. And I actually began to pray for time during that second prison sentence.
Oh, Joseph, help us to understand. I guess somebody can hear that you went to prison, and that you got involved in these racist ideologies, and you went down this track, and they might just hear that part of it and think, how can that happen? Help connect the dots for us a little bit. How does that happen? How did that happen in your life? I'm sure it wasn't just an overnight moment. It was a process. What can you share with us on that?
Well, the first thing I mentioned earlier that my father was very anti-Catholic. He was also, very racist. They're not like non-whites. They're not like Irish, for that matter. And when I moved back to London, in England, in the countryside, it was just a white English environment. And I moved back to London, and the area I lived in with an awful lot of Pakistanis and Sikhs living in the area, and a lot of tension between the white indigenous population and the immigrant population. And so already having, if you like, sucked my father's racism, I got very angry about what I saw as my country being taken over, and allowed my anger to get the better of me. And being an angry young man, went the logical place for angry young men and look for whatever was going to be most militant, most angry, and joined this radical organization. So that's basically how I found myself in this situation. I was idealistic, and idealism can be good, but with that, if it's not rooted in caritas, it's not rooted in love, it's not rooted ultimately in Jesus Christ, then we know that where idealism can lead. It led to the killing of millions of people, the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, the Nazis. The secularist idealism is deadly, and that's basically was the path I was taking.
Joseph Pearce is with us. And so you then are reading great literature while you're in prison. So you're encountering beauty and goodness and truth in these great works. How did that point you back? Or how did that, I guess, at what point did Jesus then emerge in the midst of all of this? And you took another look at him and said, who is this Jesus? And do I believe in him? How did that all take place?
Well, Gerard Manley Hopkins, one of my favorite poets, in his poem "The Wreck of the Deutschland," talks about two different types of conversion. Probably going to mess up the exact quote now, but there's a once at a crash Paul and a slow melting Augustine. In other words, the two types of conversion are the all of a sudden, like when St. Paul is knocked off his horse, this sudden instantaneous conversion, or the slow conversion over a period of time, which we see relate to us in St. Augustine's Confessions. My conversion was very much the latter sort. So I first started reading Chesterton when I was 19, in 1980, when I was very much a racist and a violent radical. But Chesterton began to work on me. I couldn't help liking him, even though I didn't agree with him. So I didn't agree with his Christianity, certainly didn't agree with his Catholicism, but I couldn't help liking a lot of the things he said. I couldn't help liking the way he said them, couldn't help liking his sense of humor, couldn't help liking his personality and the way he wrote. So if you like, I was seduced by the goodness, truth and beauty of G.K. Chesterton. And then through Chesterton, I was introduced to his friend Hilaire Belloc, and then I discovered C.S. Lewis. So this was my reading for those 4.5 years or 5 years, whatever it was, between those two prison sentences. This was what my slow conversion was. And then on the second day of the second prison sentence, I found myself clutching some rosary beads, and I had no idea how to say the rosary. I didn't know the Glory Be, I didn't know the Hail Mary, I didn't know the Apostles' Creed. I had been taught the Our Father when I was a child, but had forgotten it. But what I did was just to mumble inarticulate prayers and fumble the beads. And this was my first ever prayer, and I was 24, almost 25 years old, and answers began to come to me, and what I now recognize as healing began to happen, and I began to go to mass during that second prison sentence. And then when I got out of prison, I knew I had to make a clean break with my past, my associates, my politics, and try to seek the healing and the goodness, truth, and beauty that comes only through the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus Christ.
Wow, incredible. Joseph Pearce, again, is our guest here with us today. His newest book, Faith of Our Fathers, A History of True England. But today he's sharing some of his personal story with us. And you can also find more about that in his book, Race with the Devil, My Journey from Racial Hatred to Rational Love. Joseph, when all this then was taking place, and and Jesus and his Catholic Church are coming alive for you. You're diving into the sacramental life. It seems like, from looking from my vantage point back into just how I first got introduced to you and learning about some of your works and just seeing the prolific nature of the good work that you've done as a Catholic man, was it pretty quickly after you started experiencing the life of Christ and a life of grace in his Catholic Church that you also had this sense of a life of mission, a life of good work, a life of going out and trying to share the truth and the treasure that you had found?
Well, yes, I was received into the Catholic Church on St. Joseph's Day in 1989. I was 28 years old. And I had this sense that I needed to do something with my life to repair the damage that I'd done as a young man through my anger and hatred and just the violence of my philosophy. So I began writing a biography of G.K. Chesterton. And the reason for that was obvious, because I always say that under grace, and obviously to God be the glory, but under grace, that Chesterton was the single most important person in my conversion process. So I wanted to write a biography of Chesterton, first of all, because I didn't think any of the existing biographies up to that point had really captured and encapsulated the wholeness of who Chesterton was, but also as an act of thanksgiving. And I always say it's an act of thanksgiving to God for giving me Chesterton, but also an act of thanksgiving to Chesterton for giving me God. And so that it was an act of thanksgiving, my writing that first biography of Chesterton, and thanks be to God, it was accepted by a major mainstream publisher in the UK, Hodder and Stoughton, and then I had to make a choice as to whether I was going to just write the one book and leave it there, because obviously trying to write a book of that length is a somewhat substantial tome when you have a 9-to-5 job and you're trying to write it in your spare time. I was single at the time. It would have been impossible if I was a married man. That I realized I couldn't do that again. So I had a choice. Either that was it, or I had to give up the day job and try to become a full-time writer. And I took that latter choice. I took the adventure and gave up the day job and wrote. And then I had to write books quickly enough to keep a roof over my head and to pay the bills and keep myself fed. And that's what I did. So for my last 5 years in England, from 1996, when the Chesterton biography was published, to 2001, when I moved to the States, I was a full-time writer. And I wrote, I'm not sure how many, but something like eight books or so during that time.
Incredible. Joseph Pearce is with us. He is one of the world's foremost Catholic biographers, perhaps the world's foremost Catholic biographer. Some of those titles would be the one he just mentioned. So A Life of G.K. Chesterton, Wisdom and Innocence, Tolkien, Man and Myth, The Unmasking of Oscar Wilde, C.S. Lewis and the Catholic Church, Old Thunder, A Life of Hilaire Belloc, just incredible works. Again, also the Ignatius Critical Edition, so much more, so many articles and other things that he's been a part of, other books you can find, including the one about his own story, Race with the Devil, My Journey from Racial Hatred to Rational Love, and also his newest book, Faith of Our Fathers, A History of True England, a very important work for our time to reflect on as we seek to re-evangelize these areas that have sadly been just lost, and the faith has been robbed of just so many in our time, in these areas where once the faith was so rich. So we're going to be right back with Joseph Pearce. He's going to share some more with us in just a moment. So hang on. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. Pro-life legal experts say it is becoming increasingly clear that the FBI arrest of a Pennsylvania man on charges earlier dismissed in court is politically motivated. Furthermore, when Mark Houck heard that federal agents were pursuing those court-dismissed charges, he offered to come in and talk with agents. Instead, an FBI raid by 20 agents exposed Mark Houck and his family to overwhelming deadly force. The FBI is facing criticism in the U.S. Senate for its actions. And Bill Donahue of the Catholic League is seeking congressional investigation of the raid.
Elections over the weekend in Italy are stunning leftist politicos in Europe. Giorgia Meloni is a faithful Catholic, is pro-life and pro-family. Running up to the election, Meloni blasted both the pretense of woke and of those who seek power by dehumanizing other human beings. Winning by a landslide, she is Italy's new prime minister. This is Life News Radio. Voting this November is so much more than issues like abortion. Your vote this November may be seen as an act of drawing the poison out of a society addicted for over 50 years to abortion and to a disordered sexuality. It is not even about winning. It is about calling our world to cultural ideas that work. Vote like something big depends on you, because it does. In other headlines, at least 2 social media giants are censoring documented criticism of Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger as a eugenic racist. 40 Days for Life begins this week and goes through November 6th. Interested participants may visit 40daysforlife.com. And a survey of U.S. Senate candidates shows every Democrat supporting abortion up to birth. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today on this Testimony Tuesday, Joseph Pearce. And Joseph, let's just dive right back in. We're kind of going in a linear fashion here, but also various themes pop out. And as we get into you're leaving the UK, leaving England, heading over to the States and sharing more about your journey forward. Can we stop for a moment on the theme of just your relationship with your father? It's so prominent in so much of what you've already shared, for good and for bad. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about the relationship with your father moving forward? I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that theme. And I would just love to hear about, has God shown up in that relationship in some way that it would be good for us to hear, yes or no, I suppose, and just any sort of lessons that you've learned in terms of reflecting upon that relationship with your father?
Well, first of all, Jim, I'd like to thank you for asking the question, because I always feel guilty if I give the bad side, if you like, the dark underbelly of my father and my relationship with him without actually giving the fullness of the truth. Because first of all, as I was growing up, my father was a paradox. So I always say that he hated in the abstract but loved in the concrete. In other words, he loved people. So he was a carpenter, so he worked in the construction industry, and every person he met, regardless of the color of their skin and nationality, he would love them as a person. He just loved people. But he hated in the abstract. So he had ideas about what England was. England, was to be English was to be white, and he's proud of the empire and all of that sort of political stuff, and that abstract politicking clouded his view of reality. But the most important thing is he always loved in the concrete. And I think he passed that on to me. I think I've always loved people, even if I hated in the abstract. So I got that from him. Also, as I said, he was an autodidact. He taught himself. He loved books, and I got that from him. But most important of all, and this is very important, he became a Catholic himself. And spent the last 10 years of his life in the church, and had a very holy death. So, all's well that ends well, as William Shakespeare would say.
Wow, wonderful. So glad to hear that. And again, we're talking with Joseph Pearce today. You can learn much more about him at jpearce.co. That's jpearce.co. And share with us now, I guess, as you went forward from, so you're getting into a lot of writing, you're doing a lot there, but then coming on over to the States, what was that like? How did things progress from there?
Well, as I said earlier, I was a full-time writer in England. So I was the resident tutor at a summer program in Oxford in 1999. And I met a young American lady there, and subsequently corresponded. And to cut a long story short, that young American lady became my wife, and she moved to England when we first got married. We had our honeymoon in Lucca in Tuscany, beautiful city, and then also in Rome when we had our marriage blessed by St. John Paul II on our honeymoon. So we got off to a flying start, so to speak. But about 3 weeks after we got back from our honeymoon, I was offered a job with Ave Maria College in Michigan, as it then was, which became Ave Maria University. And so only 4 months after we got married, I mean, Susanna, my wife, only lived in England for 4 months, and then I accepted the job. And we actually moved to the States on September the 7th, 2001. In other words, 4 days before 9/11. And the first day of classes for me, so first day on the new job in a new country was 9/11. So it was a surreal experience for everybody. Anybody who was old enough to remember 9/11, it was a surreal experience. But for me, perhaps in a particular way, being new to the country, 4 days in the country, first day teaching at Ave Maria, and 9/11 happened. So obviously a day that nobody forgets, but for me, a very, very, not just a memorable, but somewhat bizarre and surreal day.
Wow. Yeah, that's remarkable. I think, Joseph, my first introduction to you, I was a graduate student at Franciscan University in Steubenville. I think it was maybe 2003 when I first started there, and it was an early part in my own journey. Very excited to just learn more and more, hungering and thirsting to learn more about Jesus and his Catholic Church. And I remember you showing up on campus. I believe you were part of a presentation with Dr. Regis Martin in regard to the Lord of the Rings, and talking about the books and how it was. I think it was almost like a trial, a mock trial that was going on, or something like that. But maybe share with us a bit about just your love of Tolkien as a writer and his works, and you're not just someone who's writing about these things. Your love of these works, your love of these people, it really resonates. It really comes out strong in your passion as you write and as you speak. Maybe just speak to that a little bit for us, if you would.
Absolutely. If I first might, however, talk about the Franciscan University connection, you have something in common with Susanna, my wife. She got her master's in theology at university, I think 1997 or 1998. We met in 1999. We were actually married at St. Peter's Church in Steubenville in 2001. And then obviously Susanna moved to England. She was living in Steubenville at the time, even though she graduated, got a master's degree there. So I remember very, very well what we had at Steubenville there back in 2002 or 2003 was 2003 might be right at the date you gave. It was a mock trial of Peter Jackson of the Desecration of the Lord of the Rings for his film adaptation of the work. So but for me, Tolkien said, with respect to the Lord of the Rings, that, and I'm quoting him word for word here, the Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously at first, consciously in the revision. So I spent a lot of time, I've written 3 books on Tolkien, trying to explicate and explain that Catholic dimension in that great work, which is one of the greatest and best-selling works of literature of all time, which is profoundly Catholic.
Yes, and this important aspect of education, that is, I think, a theme in your work. You're teaching, you're writing, you're helping people to understand very, very important things that are worthy to be understood. Can you speak to that for a moment as well? Just the importance of a Catholic formation, but as the intellectual life, but not an over intellectualism. But the fact of the importance of education and really understanding some of these classic works and other things that you share with folks. It's important stuff. Can you just help, I guess, anybody who's listening that might not be plugged in on all of that, just a bit of an introduction?
Yeah, so the important thing was I had a very bad education. I had basically a radical relativist education. And the consequence of my bad education was I went to bad places and ultimately to prison twice. So I'm very passionate about education, the difference between a bad education, which can ruin lives and destroy people, and a good education, which can save lives and give life. So that's the foundation for it. And of course, the Catholic Church has always insisted in indissoluble union, the indissoluble marriage between fides et ratio, between faith and reason. So it's very important that we insist upon the connection between the faith that we profess and reason itself. When the Logos, God is the Logos, God is the ratio. All reason emanates from him because he is the reason for everything, and all the practice, the exercise of reason leads back to him. The exercise of reason leads back to God. So that's a part of my passion for true education. I also believe, by the way, that when Jesus Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he was saying, I am the good, the true, and the beautiful. I am the fulfillment of those transcendentals of Greek philosophy. The way of goodness, which is love, the truth of reason, and the life of beauty. Beauty is the life in things, not just the life in the thing observed, but the life in the person observing it. The important thing about the relationship between the beholder of beauty and beauty itself is you have to be alive to experience it. Gollum does not see the beauty in an oak tree. You have to have that sense of wonder. Thomas Aquinas teaches us, that there's a fivefold, if you like, we have five physical senses, we also have five metaphysical senses. Thomas Aquinas tells us, begins with virtue, particularly humility. Humility gives us a sense of gratitude. Gratitude opens the eyes in wonder. Wonder leads us to contemplation. And it's only when we move to contemplation we experience the dilatatio, the dilation, the opening of the mind and the heart and the soul into the fullness of the real, who is God. So that's why education is so important. We have to see the connection between the good, the true, and the beautiful, and the way, the truth, and the life.
Outstanding. Joseph Pearce is with us. His website is jpearce.co. You can learn much more about him and his good work there, jpearce.co. Joseph, going on from Ave Maria University, what else would you like to share with us in terms of how your life progressed from there? Anything else with respect to the faith that any big moments, any aspects of just faith coming more alive in any unexpected ways? Anything else that you'd like to share with us?
Well, one thing that I think one of the greatest gifts that God's given me is during my married life, actually, and paradoxically and possibly ironically, is the gift of suffering. So, our first son, Leo, was born, it's our first son, our only son. We've had 4 miscarriages, so I have no idea whether we have other sons. But our son, Leo, was born with Down syndrome and autism. And he has been an astonishing gift. And someone said to me once, which is profoundly true and affected me greatly, that most of us are here to learn, but some of us are here to teach. And children with Down syndrome are here to teach. So Leo is now 20 years old, has been our teacher, and he's taught us most of the most important lessons that we've learned in our marriage. And then we also had a daughter who is stillborn, the experience of that was such. I remember cradling her in my arms shortly after she was born, looking up at the crucifix. And it's the only time in my life that I felt that our Lord has taken me up with him on the cross and embraced me in crucifixion with him. Every time I look at the crucifix before and since, I see myself nailing him to it. But that particular time, he took me up with him into it. And that there was great consolation in his sharing of my suffering and of my sharing of his. So for me, the gift of suffering has been one of the most blessed, painful. No one's saying it's pleasant. It's not about pleasure. It's about growing closer to God. And the experience of suffering has certainly made me and my wife Susanna closer to God Thanks be to God.
So beautiful. Yeah. For anybody right now who might be going through some dark trials, some temptations, maybe in suffering, anything that you would like to speak into that, just knowing the truth of things as you do, anything you'd like to share?
Well, the key thing is, that the suffering is unavoidable. And the irony is that those people who spend their time trying to avoid it end up suffering more than those who don't. So, you can't avoid suffering. So running away from it is a waste of time. The key question is, what do you do with it when you receive it? And there's a wonderful line by a priest character in a novel by a very good novelist who most people won't have heard of, called Maurice Baring. And the priest character in one of his novels says, "The acceptance of sorrow is the secret of life. When you understand that, you will understand everything." Not sorrow, not suffering, but the acceptance of suffering. That's the key. And if you don't accept your suffering, you'll be like the bad thief on the cross. If you do accept your suffering, you'll be like the good thief on the cross. One goes to heaven, and the other's going to be bitter and twisted and go to all sorts of weird places.
Yeah, a great blessing to have Joseph Pearce with us. His website, jpearce.co. And if you are going through some difficult sufferings right now and you're tempted to turn from God, just want to encourage you to really listen to those words from Joseph and to just keep that fundamental, simple truth of just turning to God, turning to Jesus on the cross in that time, fighting that temptation to turn away, even though you may feel nothing. Just go to Him, turn to Him. His love is there for you. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
You can listen to any of our network-produced programs at your convenience, wherever you enjoy podcasts. Hear a powerful sermon you need to share with a loved one? Maybe there's a guest or teaching segment that deserves another listen. You can find all of our shows on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, our website, and the free iCatholic Radio app. Be uplifted in your faith. Listen today at thestationofthecross.com or on your favorite podcasting platform.
Each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, the Station of the Cross brings you Mother Miriam Live.
Live your faith as if it's true. Live as a people of God and love one another. Do that, and you will convert your neighbors and the world.
Tune in from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern for Mother Miriam Live on the Station of the Cross and our free iCatholic Radio mobile app.
The Catholic Current, bringing Christ to the world and the world to Christ.
Sexual difference is something that ties us to all of creation, and that includes our bodies.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there are people who rhapsodize about nature and they want to have everything organic while carpet bombing their bodies with oral contraceptives. But yet when it comes to God really did make us male and female, there seems to be a lot of contradictions.
The Catholic Current, 5 p.m. Eastern, from the Station of the Cross and on the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Hi, this is Joe McClain, host of the Catholic Drive Time Morning Show. Weekday mornings, 7 a.m. on the Station of the Cross. We'll keep you informed and inspired with insightful guests and breaking news stories of the day. That's the Catholic Drive Time. Weekday mornings, 7 a.m. on the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio app. We look forward to joining you on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network each weekday morning at 7 a.m. Praise be to Jesus. May God love you.
Back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Joseph Pearce, sharing some of his personal testimony with us today. He's a Catholic husband and father, also director of book publishing at the Augustine Institute, editor of the St. Austin Review, series editor of the Ignatius Critical Edition, senior instructor with Homeschool Connections, and senior contributor at the Imaginative Conservative. He's written many great books, including his newest title, Faith of Our Fathers, A History of True England. Also one of the world's foremost Catholic biographers, perhaps the world's foremost Catholic biographer. Also has a great book on his own story, Race with the Devil, My Journey from Racial Hatred to Rational Love, as well as being a terrific speaker. And if you're interested in booking Joseph Pearce for a talk, please contact him via the Catholic Speakers Organization, catholicspeakers.com. All right, final segment here, Joseph. Down the stretch we come. Anything else that you want to share with us? Any other lessons learned that you'd like to transmit? And then perhaps we could talk a little bit after that about that newest book that you've written, Faith of Our Fathers. But anything that we haven't touched on yet that you really want to make sure to get across?
Well, I think the key thing is that we have to understand that the church is the church militant. The church is not just the church militant. The church is the church triumphant, the church suffering, and the church militant. But our part of it, the part in time where we are, is the church militant. And all of us are Miles Christi, soldiers of Christ. And we're fighting, as Tolkien would say, the long defeat with only occasional glimpses of final victory. So we should not worry unduly about the fact that this world is a place of warfare, because it's always been a place of warfare since the fall of man. And we're here as soldiers. And God, in his infinite mercy, gives us a relatively short period of active service in the military, 70 years and 10 proverbially, much shorter for some people, longer for some people, but the point is it's relatively short. The end of the world, the apocalypse, for each of us is when we die. So all we have to do is keep our own eyes on the finishing line. We don't have to worry about when the world is going to end, because when we enter heaven, please God, and thanks be to God, if and when it happens, we leave this relatively small part of the cosmos, because the cosmos ultimately is the church triumphant in heaven, which is eternal, where there's no sin, where there's no war, where there's no temptation, and that's what we're aiming for. So aim for stars, aim for Jesus Christ, aim for heaven, and the only way to do that is to keep your eye on the finishing line. The four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell.
Great wisdom here with Joseph Pearce. His website is jpearce.co. Learn a lot more about him and his good work there, jpearce.co. Joseph, in your newest book, Faith of Our Fathers, A History of True England, what is that like, the process of writing these books that you write? I guess I would ask the question this way. In particular, as far as your own personal experience in the process of writing this newest title, Faith of Our Fathers, how did that change you? What was the greatest lesson that you learned in writing it?
Well, the key thing is, that the history of England has been distorted. Well, history in general has been distorted. We know what the woke do with it, but England was a profoundly Catholic country for 1,500 years, from the 1st century to the 16th century, and even then, the English did not desert the faith. It was ripped away from them by the King, Henry VIII, and then there was 300 years of glorious resistance by the Catholics of England to that stealing of the faith from England. And then there was a great Catholic revival in the 19th century heralded by St. John Henry Newman. So I wanted to tell that story. There's no book that's been published so far that's adequately given the 2,000-year history of England, from the arrival of the first missionaries in 63 AD, only 30 years after the crucifixion, and then that Catholic presence in England for now almost 2,000 years. I wanted to tell that story, and England's been crucified, and the Catholics of England have been crucified. 150 years between the 1530s and the 1680s, when it was punishable by death in England to be a Catholic priest. It was punishable by death in England to hide a Catholic priest from the authorities. For me, these, ironically, paradoxically, and beautifully, that 150 years for me, the crucifixion of England, was the most beautiful part of English history, because that's when the English had to witness to their faith in the fullness of that, which is martyrdom. And so the lowest point, if you like, from a worldly perspective in English history, the crucifixion of Catholic England is, to me, the highest point. And then, of course, after the crucifixion, we have the resurrection. We've been talking about Chesterton, I've been talking about Tolkien and St. John Henry Newman and many other great figures. They are the resurrection of the Catholic Church in England, which happened from the middle of the 19th century onwards.
Yeah, when we look at some of these great heroes, St. Edmund Campion, I think St. Philip Howard, when we think about these guys and the way that they were willing, they truly left no doubt that they truly believed in Jesus and his Catholic Church and were willing to give everything. Can you just speak to that, I guess, in our time when when not so much is being asked of us? And it's a lot easier to just be lukewarm and to kind of, go through the motions and not continue to strive forward in the faith and not really live out that role of being in the church militant as we are called to. Anything to just kind of invigorate us today in the truth of things.
Well, again, the paradox is that when things are too comfortable for Christians, they become corrupt. That suffering, the crucifixion, is sent to us as a blessing to purify the church. And if you look at the history of the church, not just the history of Catholic Kingdom, which I've been talking about, but the book I've just finished writing actually is the history of Christendom. So the history of the church from the 1st to the 20th century. What you find is that God, if you like, sends persecution or permits persecution, as he permitted the crucifixion, as a means of purifying the sinners of their corruption. When the church gets too comfortable with the world, the church and members of it become corrupt. Ultimately, every generation, all of us, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, the battle between good and evil takes place in each individual human heart. In the heart, that battle between good and evil, between the homo viator, the pilgrim man we're called to be, and the homo superbus, the proud man that refuses the calling. So that is the struggle that takes place in every single generation, and that is what we have to keep in mind. That ultimately, the suffering is good for us. I've mentioned about my own personal suffering in our marriage with our children, but that's a microcosmic thing. On a macrocosmic level, God sends us the suffering so that the church can be purified. So we should not be concerned about the rise of secular fundamentalism in every generation. And that's one of the things you realize if you understand history. In every generation, every century of the church, there have been challenges. Either the church has been attacked by secularism, they've tried to crush it physically, or it's become corrupt from within because it's become too comfortable. So that's the pattern, that's the oscillation. All we have to do is to play our part along with our brothers and sisters throughout history. And if we get to heaven, please God, our brothers and sisters will be present with us. They won't be the past, they will be with us in the ever presence of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thanks be to God. Joseph Pearce, thank you so much for being with us today, for all of your good work. And I ask everybody to continued prayers for Joseph and his family, all of his good work as well. Thank you, Joseph.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jim. God bless you.
Absolutely. God bless you. And again, his website, jpearce.co, jpearce.co. I think a great way to end this is just by remembering that perfect example we have of our Blessed Mother Mary there, standing firm beneath the cross, totally facing her Son, offering up her sufferings in union with his perfectly. This is who we are called to be. So let us go forward with the help of Our Lady to our Lord Jesus, letting him strengthen us, purify us, and to be all that we are called to be in him. God bless you.